So I tried to wait for you. You were at the yeah, he was. Yeah, he was.
All they do is talk. So Caroline said, right? Sure. Because you reduce our commission, you have to do. I think he just went off 55. Yeah. It's really the unique thing. I mean, that was the capital thing.
Well, whatever, I mean, I have to ask for one question. Oh.
Rooms.
You guys left the
I
truck.
guess they figured out how to do it.
Well, they didn't seem to know that.
He told me that
He was running
this is
out.
on the store. And I said, yeah, he said, the buyer has a seat in Florida. So he spends the winters. His buying.
I know you.
I think I know the check.
His email address, you know, he doesn't know his email. It's liquidbuyers.com. So he must have some other business. So he spends the whole winter.
How are you?
Today I bought 2 flash drives.
Okay.
So now my grandson.
Oh, it transferred all over?
Right, because I bought this.
All the new ones. I put it on. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Oh,
It's on the outside, right?
yeah, it should be on the.
So
So I
you go up to.
spent about 4 hours in that basement.
Yeah. So she's doing that
We
now.
had all our history. My dad used to have a movie camera and the whole, that's the wireless tape recorder. So then we made the 8-track, and years ago, we spent hundreds of dollars transferring that. And my brother said, I was looking at the film.
Yeah.
So we came out, I think online away. Oh, no, so now they got the equipment work, but who knew?
It's fairly new.
Yeah.
I know. So are you.
You know what? I asked him, but no one has an ECR anymore, because I couldn't take the equipment easy.
I just remember the 8-tracks.
How the parents?
I've been slicing it if it didn't work right. It was so different.
Yeah, I sat in the basement, it's on this little mini screen, and I didn't watch it for 4 hours. Your whole life goes, my dad was fabulous, he started taking these things, I think I was 3 years old. And then he,
Oh,
kids line, I don't know, I have to say, a lot of people just, my dad
I
said,
gave mine away a
oh,
while
no.
I had Judy Jensen, I had,
That's interesting to see.
was the producer and director
From,
of the first Dire Straits.
That's
Like movie and, TV, the whole thing. And I gave that away because.
So I was determined to do, and when I lost my copy, I'm down at the anchor, we got one, I lost it. My sister's in Canada, she had a copy. Otherwise, I would have lost. I had friends.
I was bothered that I was nowhere.
Mom at the end.
Who's the buyer?
Yeah, Denise, Denise, you know, on that stuff, the one, Denise used to work at CBS on there. They were on,
They lived
right
on
before Howard, what was the street?
Howard,
Hubbard.
Hubbard, right there. And that first house
Oh, really?
before the anchor was on that side.
Right.
Man, he lived there before he passed away. You know, he owned the window place on, around the curve. Main Street.
I thought you didn't even
We
talk.
brought him there, and he knew,
Okay.
I was friends with both of them, and with his son on Facebook. Facebook is the best.
Watch me.
And that.
Lousy.
Oh, I don't. Just stay in contact. Everything that's going on, which is kind of fun, but some of it's too much.
World, I have cousins in North Belmore and Seaford.
Anyone sitting here? Anyone sitting here?
No, be my guest.
Concerned teachers.
Look efficient.
I have a lot of paperwork to do. I couldn't bring it with me. Can't leave this stuff in the car. Yeah, I had to do.
I always put my bag, like, before I leave the house, so no one should leave the pocketbook.
Yeah, I didn't do that either.
I do it at home.
Yeah, you're supposed to.
Yeah, I always,
And that's why I was there. Number 2 on the agenda. Doing what I've been doing because Cynthia. Yeah, exactly. No, because I never, Cynthia was inspired to get on this. I know, I more like to call people out, like you. Yeah. Oh, let me put it on speaker.
Thank you. My oldest is Baltimore. I got the driver and I goes to has Hershey in a couple of weeks. Yeah. It's just north.
Oh, you know, yes, I know. Thank you, I'll see you. What? Hi, Dorothy.
hi.
Okay, okay. I have just 2 bags and I'm sad anyway.
So I guess I should just talk to the crowd, right? Hey, everybody. I was at a birthday party today, and a woman said, "Oh, I see that you're doing a program down on the mile in September." And I am. I have no idea what she was talking about. So, if anybody knows, let me know.
I saw something. Yeah, I think you are.
Am I? Which program am I doing?
You're doing something with, it was,
Something.
with the,
Something.
with the Arts Council. You're doing something with the Arts Council. Yeah.
I guess I have time to prepare. I guess one is figure out what it is.
Once again, just make it up usually.
Exactly.
Just
I
wing it.
just fly by the seat of my pants. I don't know.
Like today, we're doing a choice point.
Exactly.
Let's see.
Hello.
Please tell me.
No, seriously, she.
I saw something, I don't know if it was with the Arts Council.
Was it? Did it involve dance or juggling or what?
No, bicycling.
It's
That I can do.
Maybe it's more of like the program you did at Bar.
Good, how are you?
Excuse me, Andrew. I don't know, from the parking lot.
Hello.
Have some seats here.
Welcome home. Oh, they're putting on trays. You have the food, right? They're putting it on trays. No, you sit down, I'll take it. Yeah, we got the dishes. Got it.
That's different. Yes.
You want to sit next to us on the stage?
No.
Carol's very happy, but I'm fine.
I push myself all the time. And it's just something, it is, I don't want it to go. If you take your mind off in 1 second, you screw up. It's very difficult, I like it.
So do we know what we're doing? 'Cause-
Yes, maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I did an arts council one, and she did it back in May.
When you get a better view, right? You can't see back.
I can't find anything. I tell you what I am.
Well, I.
So I'm working with a teacher at the high school.
Oh, yeah, we try to see what.
Fellowship in NYU for a Latino spot. And she's had her
I didn't think it was gonna be as big
their
as
parents
it
about their journey to mental health. And that's really, so we're gonna work on.
No, I just, I think it's a couple of years ago. Right.
So, and so she got it translated and.
Hello, you.
Hello, you.
Hi, how are you? Or right up front. There's 2 seats right on stage if you want to.
I have trouble with the front.
Hello. Hello.
I was so proud.
Something on the way. Funny.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, she was not. Oh, they were 10 years apart. Yes. He was the baby brother.
Is it too cold?
Razor's girl.
Was that fast enough?
But,
Sorry.
they all have, my mother, my sister, my brother. You got that one. I'm glad I meant you.
Joe here. Yes. What? I know, it's gonna take a while,
If anything else,
but,
Patience
I'm
is
it was
not
so, it was really hot.
I'm just afraid.
I said patience is
I
hard. Robin.
Elvis is in the middle.
Okay, good. Robin, am I doing anything in October? What?
Why do I keep
Oh.
playing the lead?
There's a rumor going around that I'm doing something in the fall down at you. And I'm like,
That's everybody wishing you were.
I'm like,
How's that?
right, am I doing something with you guys?
I don't know, I'll let you know after tomorrow morning.
We all want you.
We're planning on next year.
Oh, well.
This is like.
But it's amazing how many people get hurt, that's scary.
Oh, may I? Come on, man. Wow. Come
It's the custodian set up my chairs.
I was gonna put one right now, too. I think he has a dinner and it's like Anna.
Oh.
on. Yeah, I saw
Yes, that was. Yes, that, yes, I remember missing. I like it. It's an interesting points of view. I like it.
Okay, so, Jose, can you just get on to Zoom so Jonathan can get on?
I'm on, you can just log on. It's already set for him.
Oh, yeah. I'm always like, what? I'm here.
They used to.
He hasn't logged on yet?
This is free.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you, can you text him? He didn't log on yet. Okay. Do you want me to also? Yeah.
Did you prefer the inside seat? You like the
Do you
music?
just want to make it? Hi, everybody. Just while we're setting up and trying to get Jonathan on from the UK, just a couple of things. If you could just turn your cell phones off. And if you need to, there's bathrooms in the hallway. Okay? We'll be starting in a few. Jose, what's the right Zoom? Is it the one on your website? No. That's what we're trying to do some people. Yeah. Trying to get in. Okay, can you send it to me?
lovely. Yeah. She's great.
Hi, can you hear me?
Thank you.
Hey.
Hey, what's up?
So your camera's up front there.
Okay. It's weird to see that, but it's really there.
Okay. Okay, we ready to go? Ready to rock? We're ready. All right, let's do this.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm the library director, Leanne Olson. Thank you all for joining us tonight for the official launch of a brand new book called The Choice Point by Joanna Grover and Jonathan Rhodes. The Choice Point unveils a scientifically proven approach to overcoming mental barriers and achieving your goals. Joanna Grover is a board-certified member of the International Coaching Federation and fellow of the Harvard Institute of Coaching. She's made significant contributions to the field of mental health through her work in functional imagery training. In fact, Jo was the first person to offer this type of training in the United States. As a cognitive therapist and coach, she's worked with top leaders at the U.S. Department of Commerce, high-level executives at Citibank and IBM, and Olympic athletes. Jo has a BA in Communications from Syracuse University and a master's in social work from NYU. Along with her co-author, Jonathan Rhodes, she's co-founder of Imagery Coaching. Jo's also a Freeporter. As many of you may know, the Grover family, the Grover family has been synonymous with Freeport for decades. In fact, it was Jo's mom, Rosemary, who coined the name Nautical Mile for Woodcleft Avenue in the 1960s. And her father, Al, is best known for his history making 3,000-mile journey from Canada to Portugal in a 26-foot Grover-built skiff named the Spirit of Freeport. Jo is the founder of Operation Splash, a volunteer-based organization dedicated to improving the quality of Long Island's South Shore bays, waterways, and beaches. So let's welcome Jo back to Freeport.
I'll get to you in a minute, John.
Co-author Jonathan Rhodes is joining us virtually this evening. That is if technology keeps cooperating. He's an applied psychologist working with Olympic athletes, business executives, the military, in education and healthcare. John holds a PhD in psychology from the University of Plymouth and is a chartered member of the British Psychological Society. As part of a series of projects with the aim to control intrusive thoughts, John helped develop functional imagery training and now coaches the approach specifically for increasing individual and team performance. By working on values, beliefs, thoughts, and actions, John credits lasting behavior changes to shared connections, autonomy, and mastery, the fundamentals of intrinsic motivation. His clients report better self-awareness and increased self-efficacy and a higher level of resilience. This results in them planning effectively and achieving their goals. John lives in Plymouth with his wife, Katie, and son, Rory. Welcome, John. Just a few notes, after the program, you'll have an opportunity to purchase a copy of the book, and the proceeds from tonight's book sales will be donated to the library. Refreshments for tonight's program were donated by Joanna's parents, Al and Rosemary Grover. We thank the Grovers very much for their generosity. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to our librarian and archivist, Regina Feeney, who will be moderating the conversation with the authors tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Jose, Jonathan can't see us. Is that okay? You can just hear us. Yeah, Jonathan, I'm sorry you can't see us, but we want to take this opportunity to welcome you to Long Island. Welcome. And for Jo, welcome back to Freeport. We missed you.
Oh, thank you. And I should mention that it's 11:10 p.m. where John is.
Oh.
I'm fairly nocturnal, it's all
All right. So first of all, congratulations, you two, on your book. It is great. And one of the things I really loved about your book is its combination of research, the scholarship, the data, but also the storytelling. There's a lot in that. But on the data side, there's a couple of really interesting statistics that I just want to point out. That we have between 6,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day. And in a given day, we make something like 35,000 decisions, which means we're all very mentally tired. So I'll turn this one over to you, Jonathan. When you have a goal, let's say you want to like lose weight or test better or perform better, what is that choice point when it comes to decision making?
Well, they're all fairly small. I think a lot of the tough choice points happen first thing in the morning as well. So if you can try and navigate those initial decisions, it sets your day up a lot more effectively than not. And for me, it's usually things like actually starting my choices the evening before, like going for a run, or the evening before, the week before, kind of thinking about healthy eating. So actually thinking more so about being conscientious, the choices that you'll make throughout your future are really key. How you're setting up your key choice points. And we know that you don't have a great deal of choice points in a day, and they become easier over time. But yeah, you're right. What we see at the minute within the data is that you have roughly 6,000 choices a day, decisions a day. So to eat healthy or not, to run or not, to exercise or not, to recycle or not, to take a certain route to work or not. So again, you make many choices, but of those choices, there are some critical ones that are your choice points, which are very value-based choices. So to say more around health, maybe it's around communication and having that awkward conversation. So those are the real critical ones that we focus in on.
So like maybe something about helping you make that choice point is maybe just putting your sneakers out so you know, okay, I am going to run. Getting your stuff ready.
But, and it could be this as simple as the first thing in the morning is wearing a gym kit. It could just be, setting things up the evening before you're about to, go for a run, or it could just be a breakfast meal that you're deciding on that you can help yourself in the long run. So all those small choices will add up. So yeah, absolutely. The sneakers, if they're by your bed, something which is very cue central, where you can see them, it jogs your memory, and it's very motivational as well.
Okay, so this one's for you, Joe. So your book talks a lot about functional imagery training to make your goals a reality. So can you talk about FIT and how does it work?
Sure, and I love that you picked up on, Regina, that we say it's both from the head, which is the data, that's John, and the heart, which is me. And we sometimes get in each other's head and hearts writing this book, and it was quite a journey. But functional imagery training, I had read about it because I had a client who wanted me to do some corporate work around weight loss. So I looked up the most significant weight loss study, and it was functional imagery training. And it went against it, like a lot of what I had been trained in. I've been trained to work with the way the mind thinks. So rewriting negative scripts. So you may say, like, I'm always going to lose, and you'd help someone rewrite that script to be more realistic. But this didn't work in the realm of words. It worked in the realm of senses. And then we can really tap into, I think, that head and heart when we have that alignment. Mm-hmm. So instead of thinking and overthinking, which I tend to do, it's imagining what it will be like. So I found it both for a client and for myself. But I was riding up in the elevator, and some folks saw my scar on my arm, and I joke and say it's from a shark bite. But I was thrown from a horse, and I shattered the humerus and the bone below. So my arm wasn't attached. It was attached by skin, but not by bone. And I went through multiple surgeries and plates and screws, and using imagery was the way that I was able to transcend pain. So it's really fascinating how thought will get you only so far. So like Einstein said, that logic will get you from A to B, but imagination will take you everywhere. And that's what we found in, and John, in it's, I always like to have the data, because intuitively we know this, but like, can we measure it in science? And we can. Did I answer your question?
You did. So there really is something to that mind-body connection, for sure. So like when somebody is training, let's say for a marathon, it's always about like getting your miles in. Like you gotta get your miles in, you gotta get your miles in. Because it's the muscle memory that you're trying to build, right? But sometimes in the middle of the race, your mind goes sideways and you have what you refer to as mental mutinies, right?
Yeah, this is John's thing. He actually did a study on the ultramarathons. Are we getting it?
Yes, so yeah. So tell us, Jonathan, like how do you get out of your own head when you're running a race? How, like you hit that wall and it's, your legs are fine. Your brain just is just melting.
Yeah, I think we've got to start with, when I work with ultra runners, like professional runners who do this all the time, and in my head, I think they must love it because they're going for 5-hour runs. Like, who likes that? I mean, you know, even going for a 5-minute run can be challenging. And they say, actually, I don't really like running a great deal. I said, but you're an elite athlete. Like, surely you must love running. Not really. Like, it's really hard work running up hills and over various terrains. And they're just like us, right? Where we start something and we struggle. And we have those moments of, why the heck am I doing this? I could be doing so many other things than this. And persevering is really a forte of I suppose, you know, that the research is looking really at why do people stick with things when their head says, no, stop, quit. There are other options. So again, people who do this generally, they want to learn about how their mind's working, and they want to try and master the chatter. And when you start to talk to yourself, you'll also start to generate images as well. So when you think, I'm going to stop, your brain will say, oh yeah, well if you stop, imagine how good it would feel. Imagine what you'll say to yourself. Imagine, and then you start to what we call elaborate, thinking about this in detail. So how do you manage that mental mutiny? You manage it through, in a way, you can manage it through experience, through, you know, actually enjoying that experience of mental mutiny and saying, you know, I'm actually the master, I'm the captain of what I'm doing, and I'm going to stay on course. And also for a lot of our guys, they have this conversation in the morning, or they have it the evening before, the conversation with themselves of, I know I'm going to have this thought, let's have it now while I'm not in agony, or I'm not fatigued, and I can come up with ways to try and solve these issues, solve this mental mutiny, and also overcome these obstacles. And also to think about how good it would feel to actually run, you know, whatever distance it can be. For these guys, they're running 100 miles generally, which is a real feat. So you need the mental stamina, but even for writing a book, you need mental stamina. For sending an email, sometimes you need mental stamina as well. So mental mutiny and navigating it using imagery is really a forte and a skill that you can refine.
Yeah, and as Sean was saying, so we use imagery in advance of the event and then in the event. Like, to give you an example, I find that I have a better day if I go for a swim, like a cold water swim. But the idea of a cold water swim is like, that first like few steps and then cold. But instead of focusing on that, I focus on how coffee tastes after my swim, like a warm cup of coffee, and I focus on the smell and how it will feel in my hands, and nothing tastes better than that. So it's what John was saying, it's what you elaborate on. So you can use it in the moment. I'm trying to talk myself out of a swim, but instead if I use a sensory experience of what I love about after a swim, it's going to override that mental mutiny.
And how would that work with, like, for people who don't want to be ultra marathoners, or don't want to take a cold water swim? They just want to give up smoking, or they want to lose weight. How can that help them?
No, I have a really good story about this. Do you mind, John, if I tell the strawberry story?
Please do, yeah.
What's funny is, before I tell the strawberry story, so my father, who's in the audience, my father and mother, my dad's family generations ago came on the Mayflower, and the Mayflower left from Plymouth. And that's where John is, in Plymouth. And it's a little town, they have really good gin, if anyone likes it. For anything, it'd be their good Plymouth gin. But, so I often think like I have a fourth brother, and it's John, because we sort of can sometimes get along like siblings in a good or bad way, but perhaps we're related. We haven't done the 23andMe. But back to the strawberry story. So when I came back from being trained in this method, the researchers said, we want you to take volunteers, don't charge them, and see if you're good at practicing this and record it, and we'll make sure that you're adhering to the model. So I asked some friends, like, anyone want to try? And my neighbor said, I want to give up smoking. And I had never tried to help someone give up smoking before. And you never know in our work, because our clients drive the bus. We are simply really good listeners, and we're very good at teaching, but we don't know where the bus is going because they're driving. So where we wound up on this bus to give up smoking was a strawberry. And he had a childhood memory of a strawberry. There was a delicious memory. And the sense of eating a strawberry brought back great memories. And it was the taste, it was the smell. He could hold it in his hand. He could see a strawberry field. How does it relate to a cigarette? I was wondering this myself. But the taste of a strawberry after a cigarette, it tasted like ashes. It made him sick to his stomach. So whenever he wanted a cigarette, he imagined a strawberry. And because I was his neighbor, I would, when strawberries were on sale, I'd drop off strawberries at his door just to remind him. And I can say, and John's met him, it's 4 years now, and he has not had a strawberry. He's not because of the strawberry. So we never know, like his doctor could have told him you have to give up smoking or you're going to lose a lung. You know, we're doing a lot of training in the medical world because we approach health in such a bad way. We judge people. We tell them why they need to stop doing something. We make them feel badly. I know people who don't go to the doctor because they don't want to lecture. Like, what kind of world is that, right? Whereas this program, what's so amazing is we don't know what's going to drive your behavior, but we're here to listen, and we're here to teach you a tool that you already have, but you just don't know how to use it yet.
You know, that was something I was going to ask about, because when I worked in the corporate world, and some of you have probably seen those motivational posters in business, and you walk in and it's like teamwork, it's the guys in the crew boat, and there's like, I don't know, courage, and there's lions, and it's all about this visualization of like these things that you're supposed to do. What I really loved about the choice point was it's using all the senses, and you know, bringing the smell and the taste. Because when I first read that, I was like, how is taste going to help you? But that's a perfect example of really, you know.
Yeah, no, taste and smell are very compelling. The interesting thing is we think, and even we teach, and I want to give John a moment to talk, but we teach children like we all imagine the same, but the truth is we don't. Like, I don't visualize very well. When I read a book, I can't see the character's face when I'm reading it. And so John and the researchers at the University of Plymouth, they use something called a PSIQ. And that measures your imagery ability. In fact, John, do you want to give them some questions from the PSIQ?
Okay. Yeah, I can do. So we can measure imagery ability. Let's do it in the room. Let's give it a go. So what I'd like you to try and do is rate this. I'm going to give you like an object, for example, and in your mind's eye, in your head, if you can think of like how real this is on a scale of 0, what 0 is what's John talking about, and 5 out of 5 is it is as vivid and clear as a real thing. So if I say an apple, so just think about what you might rate that as. So just as like a show of hands in the room, just a mini show of hands, who scored a 0? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
You can't see the room, but you have some good visualizers.
Yeah, we have praise and that's great. So let's do another one quickly. So we'll do, that's obviously, that's visual. Can anyone taste if I say mustard? Taste mustard. And then Joe, you can look in the room. So 0, nothing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What's the kind of average score, Joe?
That one was a little bit more spread out.
Okay.
Yeah, we had some people in the middle and then quite a few were high.
Okay.
My sister apparently cannot taste mustard.
If you reverse to mustard, you might either really get a kick of mustard when I say that, or because it can make you feel sick as well, or nothing. Okay, so we'll just do 2 more, because one for the time. But we'll do, can anyone hear hands clapping in applause?
You know what?
Can you hear hands clapping in applause?
Oh, okay.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
A lot of people can hear applause.
Well, yeah, okay. Last one, we'll do one more. And we'll do the feeling of relief. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So it's interesting for us because some people, when we do this task, will say, what? Relief? I can't imagine that. I experience it, I can't imagine it. Or visual, they'll say, I've got no image. And some people will have no internal chatter, which you might think is bonkers because you always talk to yourself. No, some people don't talk to themselves all the time. And if they think they might hear noises, no, not at all. So again, everyone's imagination is very different. And why is this important? It's important because if you're working in a group and you're trying to convey a message to other people, and you're saying, okay, so what I want you to try and do is imagine our 5-year plan and our KPIs. Some people will say, yeah, okay, I get you, yeah, I understand. Well, they won't actually understand what we're talking about at all because they can't visually or they can't auditory or they can't actually see and imagine what we're talking about. So again, it's really important to measure imagery ability. What we can do is we can then train it and we can work more so than the goals to immerse you in that goal-based experience.
But Jonathan, how does that work with a team? Like, would everybody be then on that team be going through the same test? And then you know that these people are more auditory, these people are more visual?
Yeah, so like we have here. So what we often see is when we do it in big groups, that there'll be a few people who don't rate them at all. They'll say, you can't rate a visual for whatever. And we can locate those individuals and say, well, let's work with you as individuals, but also we can look at communication structures, how we actually are communicating based on vision boarding, for example, or working with sports teams is a key one. Because sports teams will often say, okay, so the next play is this. I want you to imagine the next play, and it's going to happen. I want the ball to go here. So actually, in a team, we need to structure ways to communicate more effectively, whether it's using visuals or getting people to feel the play by going out and doing certain things in a really practical and fun way. We understand, we then communicate differently, and we can also teach people to increase their imagery ability as well.
Very interesting. I just want to talk, we talked a lot about data. I just want to talk a little bit about storytelling. And in chapter 3 of your book, you incorporate your dad's voyage across the Atlantic. And you talk about how your brother, Al Jr., I think they got to the Azores, and he's here. He was like done. And I just want I have seen footage of that travel, and I will tell you, within a half hour of being on that boat, I would have been calling the Coast Guard and been like, bring a helicopter, I'm off. So no, you made it to the Azores, like you win. But this notion of goals, and you talk about how this was your dad's dream, but this wasn't necessarily your brother's dream. And so how important is it when you have a goal to make sure that you look at what other people, that this may impact? Like if somebody wants to, let's say, run for political office, like that impacts an entire family, right? So how important is that for success, that you make sure that the key players, stakeholders are all involved?
I thought this was gonna be storytelling.
Well, that was your storytelling, but
Okay.
tell a story.
All right, so, yeah, so when we work with individuals or companies or athletes, that big picture perspective, that getting altitude on something is so important, because sometimes you're driven by a coach, you're driven to please others. Maybe you didn't really have a choice, or you were just pushed into something because you had a knack for it. And then you get to a certain point or a certain level and you start to have a mental mutiny. We've seen this more and more in the sports arena, or even you get to the pinnacle of your career. Maybe you won Olympic gold, or maybe you made it to the Olympics. And then after that, you have something called the Olympic blues and you're at risk for suicide. Like, there's all sorts of ways that we can get really caught up in like externalizing our value. So understanding your values and your dream and how it impacts others, that's something you do before you set out, hopefully. And we also talk about a walkaway point. Like, at what point are you going to give up a dream because it's taken too much of a toll on you or your family? And these conversations need to happen ideally in advance, because otherwise we can throw up our arms in a moment of emotion, and it's not really being driven by getting some perspective on something.
And so in teams, so let's say, I don't know, you work in a library that has a lot of departments, and if you would ask everybody, we have a mission, and if you ask everybody in the library that works here, somebody in reference like me would say, oh, we're about research. Somebody in children would say we're about kids. Somebody in some other department would say, oh, we're about books. Some people would say we're about programming. How do you get everybody on the same page? Like, what would you suggest that we do? Is it sitting down and making sure everybody understands the mission, or how does that work?
Well, I think, and this speaks to the third part of the book, and John actually, he was the only person from the University of Plymouth, from the functional imagery research, who went out and worked with teams. So he's really well equipped to answer this.
Okay, yeah, so tell us about.
You still awake, John?
Yeah, of course. I'm always learning. On that. The important part initially is connecting. So you can do all the great work around value, you can do all the great work around a shared goal and a shared vision. But if you've got a team that's not connected, and I'm not talking about connected because you all have a pet together. I mean, connected based on deep connections. You enjoy each other's. It could be company, it could be their conversation, it could be that you connected based on family things. Anything which is going to connect you is super, super key before you get going with a shared goal. So we found that in great depth with the military. You can do all the great training and look at all the history of legacy, where people have come from and what the regiment is. But it really comes down to, a band of brothers all connecting with each other, supporting each other, and going the extra mile together because they all genuinely care. So I think that is really key, is that human connection piece drives the rest, drives the values, drives the goals, drives the hard work, drives the communication, and that's the
And I think fun is part of that too, right, John? Like karaoke, fun is part of that, having fun together.
Yeah,
like karaoke, the military does karaoke. My brother-in-law's here, he's a big karaoke superstar. But those sort of bonding experiences are really important.
Yeah, we often get so these are all kind of elite forces guys, and we get them to sing their karaoke song, which we all have, right? We all have a karaoke song. Joe, what's your karaoke song?
I don't know one.
These boots are made for walking.
Nancy Sinatra.
Oh yeah, these boots are made for walking. I did it once.
So everyone's got one, and what they do as a group is they share it, and then they ultimately, and again, this didn't come out of the research, it came out of them being vulnerable, feeling just having that space where they're vulnerable together, and they all sang their karaoke song. Some of them loved it, and of course some of them hated it. But it exposed that vulnerability to all of them. They connected, and that's really important with that connection bit.
I thought that was, you just mentioned vulnerability. That was one part of the book that I was reading about groups, because we've all been through those training exercises where you get together and you find what we have in common, right? And you talk about in the book about finding your vulnerabilities, and that was the one point in the book I was like, no, no, because I felt that was like very, for me, it was like, I don't want people to know my vulnerabilities. But thinking about it, like, so I have never done a presentation like this. I have never done an author's thing.
I never know it.
Thank you. No, but it was something that I was really nervous about doing, because it's like,
Neither have we, by the way.
Oh, okay. So that one of the things for me was like, how do you write questions when you don't know what your answers are going to be? So it's kind of, a little all over the place. So I was really nervous about it. And I would tell people, and I told a few people, I'm really nervous about this thing. I'm really nervous about it. And every time I told somebody I was nervous, it was like a little bit of that fear dissipated, because it was, okay, I don't know, like it made me feel better.
In therapy, the work I did before, just sharing your vulnerability in a supportive crowd. And I do want to emphasize supportive, because there are moments growing up in Freeport, like, where at the time when I grew up, like, it wasn't safe to be who I was, right? Like, because I was gay, and that was like, well, the church is against you, which I don't believe. But anyway, I'm not saying be vulnerable in a group where you don't feel safe. That is unhealthy, and we don't advocate that for anybody. I used to run groups, as you know, at Miami Central and Booker T. Washington in Miami, and these are kids who, like, the state is always trying to shut down these schools because they are forgotten and they're underfunded, and it's horrible. And I can't just walk in there and be like, hey, be vulnerable with me, because they're like, who are you? You're a social worker. You're someone who brings the police. So, vulnerability comes when you have trust. It took me years to gain trust. And so we a lot of times, we can say, oh, great, I'm going to follow this recipe and then I'll get to, but you have to be patient, because it really depends on who's in front of you, what their story is, whether they want to trust you, whether they can be vulnerable, because that takes a relationship.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about sports, because you guys have worked with sports teams before. And what I found interesting is, I feel like there's a lot of superstition in sports. Like, you hear about guys that won't change their socks, they want to keep a winning streak. Or they'll just, people do odd things. And one of the things, I always thought, like, when somebody bounces the ball so many times before they serve, or they fix their batting gloves before they, before they take a swing at the plate, I thought that was all superstition. But in your book, you talk about this, doing those kind of things as cues to sort of like, okay, get in that moment. You talk about, maybe snapping your fingers or touching the side of a boat, or, if you're a rower, or, maybe touching part of your kit or your hair. Can you talk about that? Like what those cues are and how that works?
I'm giving this to John, because he loves to say things like that are pretty funny in that accent, like get a cue. So,
and kit.
No, I think everyone has one. So in elite sport, you won't see them often. It'll be a tap of a finger, or it'll be the way that someone adjusts their hair or something which means something. So a cue is, it's very deliberate, pre-programmed behavioural thing you might do. Could be something you might say to yourself that you recognise, you're not in the right frame of mind. You'll say something which is more positively spun, which is a cue to activate your injury. So cues are really key. And like if you watch tennis, you'll see 101 things. There, of course, may be some superstitions to that. terms of people doing certain things. There may be some random things in there as well, but what we're talking about here is the more deliberate things that people do, like a bounce of the ball, like a spin of a racket, like a small wardrobe adjustment as well. These things are all cues that mean something, that make people feel a certain way, and that makes them think and imagine in certain ways as well. The key here is about being deliberate with your cue. So your cue must mean something to you, and the cue must activate your imagination. Or really, what happens next? What am I in control of? What can I do? So again, you probably have cues already. Like when you wake up in the morning, you probably have a cue of, for me, it's coffee. I'm at coffee, and the smell will give me a cue, and it feels that way. And then I go through my day in my head and activate my imagery. In the military, those guys cue complete having a sip of water. That's the cue to think about the next stage of their exercise. So everyone usually has a certain cue. But it's about being really deliberate and thinking, what can I control next?
Yeah, and so I just want to make a distinction between triggers and cues. So you're in traffic, somebody cuts you off, and they gesture to you. Now you're triggered, right? You didn't plan this, and you maybe have, like some of the clients we've worked with, you're quick to anger. But you have a cue. Maybe it's a ring, and maybe your kids' names are on that ring, and you turn that ring, or you touch it. And now you're out of the weeds with between, as Viktor Frankl said, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is your freedom. So you're going to give the keys to your life to this other person. I mean, a lot of people in prison who are there because they made split-second decisions, not because they're bad people. But between being triggered and response, and responding is a space, and a cue will help you transcend that immediate anger or whatever it is. So your cue is tied to a bigger goal, a bigger vision for your life, maybe being there at your child's graduation, whatever it is. But you get out of the weeds of your emotions and into a higher plane.
Could you give an example of a cue of somebody who was wanted to lose weight? Like an example of what a cue could be?
Yeah, so one of my first clients, I was a physician. He ran the OBGYN department at the hospital in Miami. And he had multiple times, he was obese, and he had multiple times lost over 100 pounds, and he'd lose this weight, and then he'd run a triathlon, or do incredibly hard things to his body. And then he'd start eating again. And then he'd start beating himself up psychologically again. And this was a boomerang effect that was his whole life. So when I met him, he was really beating himself up. And his cue, I mean, he had a few of them, but he realized one of the problems was the cafeteria at the hospital, because he had unlimited eating there, and it was too hard for him. So one of his cues was the door to his office. He would remember, I brought my lunch today. I'm not gonna, he would be reminded of why he's a doctor, and then he wanted to be a role model for his kids. So it would trigger this other imagery. And he also used it, as John was saying, the night before, he would pack his lunch. And then we'd troubleshoot, okay, if you pack your lunch and eat at your desk, are there any downsides to that? Well, yeah, I'll be lonely, and that makes me want to eat. Okay, well, how can you, is there someone you might invite to have lunch with you? Is there someone you might call? So we're using imagery to solve these problems. But his cue was zipping up his lunchbox. Another cue was the door to his office. So these were all reminders. And he wound up losing the weight. And in one amazing moment, he called me, because he had been working toward, his imagery was he wanted to go walking. He was planning a trip, and he wanted to be with his wife and kids and be able to walk without his legs swelling, without being in pain. And so he would imagine that. And then he called me from the airplane, and I was like, is everything okay? He said, for the first time in a very long time, I didn't need a seatbelt extender. It was so I think I'm overtired, John, but it was emotional for him, because it was so embarrassing for him to ask for this. It was kind of humiliating. And it was just a moment, and here he had spent his whole life beating himself up about his weight. And we were able to connect back to that human connection in a moment of like, I'm on my way, so yeah, cues are super powerful for overriding the neural pathways of habit.
Yeah, I was going to add to that, Joe, as well. Just you mentioned about stimulus response. Where we sit with the choice point is between that gap. Stimulus, something happens, how do you respond? Well, that's your choice. This is where we work. And your imagination is in that gap as well. And what you're saying to yourself is in that gap as well. So we're looking at what you can do within that gap. And how do you manage those thoughts? And how do you make better choices? So again, cues are one way. And for some people, it could be, a cue is the fridge door. If your hand goes on the fridge door, you need to say to yourself, do I really want to eat this cheese? For me, it might be yes, it could just be that moment of my hand on the fridge door. That's a cue. And that's the stimulus, the response is up to me.
Yeah, and the average decision is made in seconds, 2 seconds. If we can add a little bit more time on that, 3 seconds, 4 seconds, and someone can use their imagery, they are now in control. They're not on autopilot.
Jonathan, how much does like social media get into like hurt us? Like, does it sort of impact those cues, or just gets in the way, or it lends itself to more mental mutiny?
Oh my goodness, wow, what a question. Yeah, I wish I could delete all my social media on my phone, that's for sure. And I'll probably have a lot more time on my hands to run more projects for sure. But I think, I think again, like all these things are all choices. Like, if you can be really mindful of what's your best self, how much time do you want to spend on it, rather than, for a lot of us, and again, me included as well, you find yourself immersed on certain things, and all of a sudden your time's gone. So really, it's about setting plans in place to ensure that you're making the most of your time, and feeling present with those around you is really key. Because I think that we often go on social media to connect with people beyond us. And what we need to do, really, especially for me, I'm always very a family person, and feeling present with my family is really key. So connecting with what's in front of you for me is a lot more, a lot more joyous than social media in a way. Although I love that we're able to zoom thousands of miles away, so that's always a plus.
In the introduction, which Martina Navratilova wrote, she talks about how she was told by a reporter that she had a hard time closing matches. And you mentioned that it's before a time where people were there was a lot of analytics, and there was a lot of, watching a lot of tape. Do you find with some of your sports clients that the analytics is sort of getting in the way? That there's too much data for them? Or is it helpful? You want to take that, Jonathan?
Yeah, there's always the issue of too much data. There's a guy I was working with at London Olympic Games who was paralysed by data, too much data. He couldn't actually compete in his own style. So I think there's the importance of analysing. It's important about analysing opponents, but the importance of looking externally and looking at opponents, what they might do. And also there's the real importance, this is the part that for him he missed that in his Olympic cycle, but of what can you do, what can you control, how do you compete, how do you play, what's your style? So I think being able to connect with beyond you, that external is really key. Analyse that, of course, and then bear that in mind, and then do what you do best. Be you. I think that's really key takeaway. I think a lot of the guys that I work with in a minute, Joe as well, we're working with a lot of athletes. Playing to your strengths is really key. Keep playing to your strengths. And again, when you're competing, don't think too externally. Think about what can I control, what can I do, what am I working on, or in terms of like, it keeps me moving my feet in terms of like tennis players, moving your feet more, being more active around certain parts of the court. Anything like that is about you and controlling your process, and that's really, really key. to be able to think correctly under pressure.
And I think with Martina, what she was saying is, she didn't know if it was true, but she focused on it.
Right,
Right,
that's stuck in her
and
head.
then she said not every game, but like she'd be in the middle of a game like, oh man, is that happening? I don't know. Is it? And then now you're out of the game because you're in your head. And she was saying it's a really frightening place to be because you need to be in the body and you need to be reactive. So yeah, it gets back to the whole theory that this is based on, which is elaboration, intrusion theory. What you elaborate on is basically what you will become.
One of the themes that I found in your book is this theme of failure. And Joe, you had an equestrian accident. Jonathan, you dealt with a UK football team who had a losing streak. There was a diver who in a competition had a major accident. But failure, like your client that couldn't lose the weight, do you not see failure as an opportunity? Like you failed and you got really hurt, but it brought you to fit and you ended up here. But do you guys see that failure as an opportunity? Like you can't change if you've never been challenged. How do you feel about that?
Totally, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think in the way the stories are generally told, we try to give a, there was an issue and then they overcame the issue, this is the end point. And clearly, there are 50 shades of failure, and there are 50 shades of success. And that continuous progress, it's all about, really about how we're going to try and, achieve a goal. But also, when people generally achieve goals, what Joe said earlier, like Olympians achieving goals, and they go, okay, I've achieved that goal. What's next?
Or like, who am I? Who am I?
For a lot of us, thinking about goal setting, we work towards our terminal goal, and then when we do get there, well, what happens beyond that goal? And that's really key. I think that failure is a part of it, and of course, I wish we could write more so about learning, progress, struggle. I always say to Joe that struggle is a very sexy word, because we don't talk about it enough, do we? We don't talk about our struggles. We don't go home and say, "Hey, honey, I had a great struggle last night." we talk about success and failure, and generally we only talk about our good stories. And actually, struggle means that you care. Struggle means that you are working hard on something that you want to try and achieve. And so, yeah, I think failure is often a term of length, but ultimately, yeah, we generally look at it as progress and struggle, and and that's part of the journey.
It creates a stronger ecosystem.
So speaking of challenges, what was it like to write this book? Living 3,000 miles away during a pandemic. And
It's a struggle.
and were there arguments about, word choices in your book? Like the American version or the
Well, there is a British version.
the British version? Oh,
So
okay.
John got to put in that funny spelling. But yeah, we struggled a lot. But it was, and John really did help me understand, like, this is part of the process. We're very different writers. We come from different backgrounds. In terms of, you can be in the world of psychology, but my experience was different than John's. So we had a lot of struggle, but we worked through it. Yeah, and it was nice at times to have somebody say, "Don't worry, we'll get through this."
Okay.
Yeah, likewise. I think it wasn't just because you guys leave out reviews in 7 words. I think it was really the way that my background's academic. And when someone says to me, "Can you please write 60 anecdotes?" It's like, what? Not really. So between us, we were able to put our heads together and come up with with stories that fit the research. And the research kind of actually, to be honest with you, I think that I'm a better researcher for it, and with Joe's input. Actually, the stories that she tells in the book, with the Grovers there in the audience as well, it's inspiring stories that you think, wow, wow. And actually, behind a lot of these stories is usually another strong person that's not on this challenge, whether it's Joe's mum or whoever it is in the background saying, hey, you committed to this. So again, I think that having people around you to support you, this is the two things, isn't it? Challenge and support. If you're highly challenged, you need a high amount of support. And if you're not challenged at all, then you don't need support. And I think we both have the support for this task. So yeah, it's a great journey.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to say this. I want you both to promise me that you guys will never consult with the Boston Red Sox. Okay, promise, please? Deal. Okay, all right, let's make sure that never happens. Okay, so so just this last question from me to you, Joe, is what is your imagery for Freeport? How would you love to see Freeport? Just because you,
John, what's your imagery? I can't see it, he's never seen it. What's your imagery for Freeport?
I'm losing signal. Can't see you.
Okay, no, so I think Freeport's always been, there was a period of time where, like when I went off to high school, I was a bit of a troubled kid. So my parents sent me to the other side of Long Island, the North Shore. And I was like, everyone's really white here. And it was just like a culture shock. And when I said I was from Freeport, they were like, ew. And I learned to say I'm from a town near Jones Beach. Like literally, they'd be like, where? I'm like, yeah, it's near the beach. It's very nautical. So I think I didn't really embrace where I was from. And coming back here and doing this here, it's funny because John and I were offered to like do this book launch from a yacht in the south of France. We were offered to do it in the Hamptons. And I felt really strongly, and John supported this, that we do it in Freeport because it's a homecoming. And I think Freeport has so many cool things going for it, that it is diverse, that it's gone through struggle, it's gone through floods, that it's gone through riots, that it's gone through so much, and it keeps reinventing itself. And that is how you get a stronger ecosystem, that's how you get a stronger community, as long as you can listen and not judge, and be, have a common image that you're working towards. But I think Freeport's an amazing place. My sister's in the audience, and my brother and my parents, like, it was a great place to grow up. Like it taught us so much about like life.
It's truly a great place. So yeah, thank you for thinking of us. So I just want to open this up to the audience. If anybody has some questions, if you can just raise your hand and I will stand up with your questions. Anybody with a question?
Very simply, how did you meet?
Okay, so the question is, how did you guys meet?
John stalked me. No, I had done this training in England, and John was not there. It was two of the other researchers, and they kept talking about him. Like, he's really smart, he's funny, he's really busy, and then he reached out to me and said, I like your website. Do you want to write a book? And at the time, I had just landed an account with KPMG, and I was like, okay, but would you be interested in working with some clients? Because we have to fund this book. Writing a book is like a financial undertaking, because you can't work as much. You have to leave time to write. And John started working with this very important client at KPMG, and the results started coming in. So then we decided to do a company around it. And to date, we've trained like 50 people around the world in this. We have interest from huge multinational companies, obviously athletes. And so it seems we have the right book at the right time. We were nominated for Malcolm Gladwell's Next Big Idea. That book is being translated into 5 languages. We'll be in the Wall Street Journal this week. We were in Must Read in the Financial Times. So it seems to transcend, continents. And I think we all know that the future is really not in our phones, it's in our imagination.
Any other questions? Anyone? Yes.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for getting involved in this whole concept throughout your life, working together
and presenting it through the book. I can't wait to buy it and read it and apply it. As an artist, I think I've used the concepts of positive imaging, not only through my own work, but with my students. Certain technique that I've been working with. But I'd also like to thank Regina. You did a fine job,
Yeah.
really good.
Amazing.
And
You have one customer, one book is getting sold tonight.
Yeah.
At least one.
yeah, Regina, I do have a question.
Yes, what's your question?
Okay, as you were talking, especially after the news of the submarine craft being lost in search of the Titanic with a tourist group, I wonder how many of them might have said, maybe I shouldn't do this, and might have talked themselves or felt themselves into taking the plunge, no pun intended. And so that brings me to the question, at what point does it become choice point and checkpoint, where the mind becomes a checkpoint? Should you try to divert what the mind is trying to tell you? Or is that part of the whole process where you listen to the mind, listen to the heart and the impulses, and you try to figure out the balance? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear you. I don't know.
Checkpoint versus,
Yeah,
choice
well,
point.
it's important to remember that the majority of our thoughts are negative. Unless you're, like, my co-author is a super positive person. Sometimes it's super annoying. But he is an eternal optimist, so he's an outlier. But for most of us, our thoughts are negative. And as a friend of mine said, she said, what you've helped me learn is that my mind is not on my team, right? So for a lot of us, our mind isn't on our team. But this journey begins with self-awareness, because we don't have an answer for everyone's mind, because everyone's unique. But if you do bend toward the negative, like most of us, then you're going to want to check your mind, because you're going to see things in a negative light. You're going to elaborate on the negative. And as we tell stories in the book, whether you're training to be a Royal British Commando, the images that you keep in your mind are whether you're going to finish that course. If you're elaborating on quitting and pain, you're likely to give up. But if you keep something in your mind that you're going towards, because this is important to you, you're 5 times more likely to succeed. Now, I think what you're talking about is risk-taking, and that's always a conversation you have to have beforehand. Because there's something called social contagion. So if we hang out with people, we are going to become like them. And it's in our subconscious, it's in our unconscious. So you need to check yourself and who you're hanging out with.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, is the book available on audio, Audible or some audio format? Or
Is it yet?
online? Yes.
Is it yet, John? I know they recorded
Yes.
it.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think I did see an audio version of it too. Are we getting to overdrive? Okay.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anyone? Okay, well, thank you guys for coming. Sorry for the stuff. Come visit us. Thank you so much for and go to bed.
Thanks so much for being great events as well. We smashed it.
Oh,
So appreciate it. And,
Smashed is a good thing.
I know. I used to live in Bournemouth. I know. Yes, thank you so much, John, and thank you so much for coming. So, anyone who wants to purchase a copy of the books will be available in the back, and will you be
Yeah, I can sign them, and the great thing is it all goes to the library.
It's all gonna go to the library. If you wanna buy a book, using a credit card, you just need to go downstairs and purchase it, and ask for a receipt. It's $28, and just come back with a receipt and we'll give you a book. Otherwise, we'll take cash. All right? So thank you all for coming.